Kim Tae-jin stood motionless in the shadows of his private study, his eyes barely open as he watched through the darkness. The maid's son had just entered the room, completely unaware that the most dangerous man in Seoul was observing his every move. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change both their lives forever. But before we reveal what the young man did that shocked even a hardened mafia boss, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe that loyalty and character matter more than bloodline or status, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories about unexpected heroes and the powerful men who recognize them deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's go back to where it all began, in the heart of Seoul's most exclusive district, where power and money rule everything. The winter rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hanam-dong penthouse as dawn broke over Seoul. Kim Tae-jin, 48 years old, with silver streaking through his jet-black hair, sat alone in his study reviewing financial reports. To the outside world, he was the CEO of Dragon Enterprises, a legitimate conglomerate worth billions. But those who truly knew him understood that Kim Tae-jin controlled half of Seoul's underground operations, from the docks of Incheon to the gambling dens of Gangnam. His empire had been built on three principles: absolute loyalty, calculated ruthlessness, and the ability to read people better than they could read themselves. It was this last skill that had kept him alive for 30 years in a business where most men didn't survive 5. At exactly 6 in the morning, as she had done every day for the past 3 years, Mrs. Park arrived to begin her cleaning duties. She was a widow in her 50s, quiet and efficient, who never asked questions about the armed guards or the late-night meetings. Her salary of 4 million won per month was more than generous, and she knew better than to jeopardize it with curiosity. But recently, Mrs. Park had made a request that intrigued Tae-jin. Her son, Park Ji-hoon, had just been released from prison after serving 2 years for assault. The boy had nowhere to go, no job prospects, and a record that ensured no legitimate company would hire him. Mrs. Park had begged Tae-jin to give her son a chance, any chance, even if it was just hauling boxes in one of his warehouses. Tae-jin had agreed, but not out of kindness. He never did anything without a reason. He wanted to see what kind of man this Park Ji-hoon was. In his experience, a person's true character revealed itself not in grand gestures, but in small, unguarded moments when they believed no one was watching. Ji-hoon was 25 years old, tall and lean, with the hardened look of someone who had learned to survive in difficult places. His knuckles were scarred, his eyes were cautious, and he moved with the careful awareness of a man who expected trouble at every corner. When he arrived at the penthouse that first morning, wearing cheap clothes and carrying nothing but a small backpack, Tae-jin observed him from behind the tinted glass of his office. The young man bowed deeply to his mother, thanked her quietly for the opportunity, and got to work without complaint. For 2 weeks, Ji-hoon arrived early, worked hard, and left late. He cleaned, he moved furniture, he ran errands, and he never once looked Tae-jin directly in the eye. It was the behavior of someone who understood the hierarchy and knew his place at the bottom. But Tae-jin wanted to know more. He wanted to see what Ji-hoon would do when faced with temptation, when the barriers came down, when he thought no one was watching. And so he designed a test. On a Friday evening, Tae-jin dismissed his guards early and sent Mrs. Park home with an envelope containing an extra month's salary, telling her to take the weekend off and visit her sister in Busan. Then he called Ji-hoon into his study under the pretense of needing help moving a heavy safe. The study was Tae-jin's inner sanctum, a room that few people ever entered. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and shelves lined with books on strategy, philosophy, and warfare. But what would catch anyone's attention was the massive mahogany desk, and on it, deliberately left in plain view, were 3 things: a black leather briefcase containing 50 million won in cash, a loaded pistol, and Tae-jin's personal laptop, unlocked and displaying files marked with the names of politicians, judges, and rival gang leaders.
Tae-jin showed Ji-hun where the safe needed to be moved, then made an excuse about needing to take an important phone call. He stepped out onto the balcony, closing the door behind him, but leaving a gap just wide enough to observe through the reflection in the window. Then, with calculated precision, Tae-jin lay down on the leather couch in the adjacent sitting area, visible through the open doorway, and closed his eyes. To anyone watching, he appeared to have fallen asleep from exhaustion, his breathing slow and steady, his body completely relaxed. This was the test. A young man with a criminal record, alone in a room with enough cash to disappear forever, a weapon and information that could be sold to Tae-jin's enemies for 10 times that amount. And the only witness was a man who appeared to be sound asleep. Ji-hun stood frozen in the study, his eyes immediately locking on the briefcase. Tae-jin watched through slitted eyelids as the young man's jaw tightened, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. 30 seconds passed, a full minute. The temptation was written all over his face, a war between desperation and something else. Then Ji-hun did something Tae-jin didn't expect. The young man walked straight past the money, past the gun, past the laptop. He grabbed a heavy blanket from the back of a chair, approached Tae-jin's sleeping form, and carefully draped him over him, adjusting it so that it covered him completely against the cold air conditioning. His movements were gentle, almost reverent, the way a son would care for his father. But he didn't stop there. Ji-hun noticed that Tae-jin's reading glasses had slipped down and were about to fall. He caught them carefully, folded them, and placed them on the side table within easy reach. Then he dimmed the lights in the room, moved silently back to the study, and continued moving the safe, making as little noise as possible so as not to disturb Tae-jin's rest. For the next hour, Ji-hun worked in near silence. He never once glanced at the money. He never touched the laptop. He never even looked in that direction. When he finished moving the safe, he quietly cleaned up the scuff marks on the floor, organized the tools, and then did something that made Tae-jin's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Ji-hun took out his own worn jacket, the only decent piece of clothing he owned, and laid it over the back of Tae-jin's chair in case he got cold when he woke up. Then he wrote a note on a piece of scrap paper. "The safe has been moved, sir. I've locked the balcony door for security. Please rest well. Park Ji-hoon." The young man turned off all but one small lamp, picked up his backpack, and left, closing the door so quietly it barely made a sound. Tae-jin lay there in the darkness for a long time after Ji-hun left, the blanket still covering him, staring at the ceiling as the rain continued to fall outside. In 30 years of ruling Seoul's underworld, he had seen every kind of person. He had seen men kill their own brothers for money. He had seen women betray their families for power. He had seen loyalty bought and sold like cheap merchandise. But he had never seen this. Pure, uncalculated kindness from someone who had every reason to be bitter, who had nothing to gain, and who believed no one was watching. Tae-jin sat up slowly, picked up his phone, and made a call. When his head of security answered, he said simply, "Find out everything about Park Ji-hoon. I want to know his full story by tomorrow morning, and from now on, he works directly for me." That weekend, while Ji-hoon believed he was simply getting a few days off, Tae-jin's people compiled a complete dossier on the young man's life. What they discovered painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Park Ji-hoon had been a promising student, top of his class in high school, with dreams of becoming a teacher. But when his father abandoned the family and his mother fell ill, Ji-hoon dropped out to work 3 jobs to pay her medical bills. He had no time for school, no time for friends, no time for the future he had once imagined. The assault charge that sent him to prison had occurred when he found 3 men beating a teenage girl in an alley. Ji-hoon intervened, and in the fight that followed, he had seriously injured one of the attackers. The girl had run away in fear, and without her testimony, Ji-hoon had no way to prove he was defending someone. The attackers turned out to be the sons of a wealthy businessman who made sure Ji-hoon received the maximum sentence. In prison, Ji-hoon kept his head down, earned his GED, and spent every spare moment in the library reading philosophy and literature. The guards reported that he had broken up 2 riots, not through violence, but by talking people down, by finding common ground, by being the voice of reason in a place where reason rarely existed. When Tae-jin finished reading the report, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made another call. By Monday morning, things were going to change. Ji-hoon returned to work on Monday, expecting another week of moving boxes and cleaning floors. Instead, he found himself summoned to Tae-jin's study at precisely 9 in the morning. His heart pounded as he climbed the stairs, wondering if he had done something wrong, if this was the moment he would be fired, or worse. When he entered, Tae-jin was sitting behind.
Tae-jin gestured to the chair across from him, and Ji-hoon sat, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes respectfully lowered. For a long moment, Tae-jin said nothing, simply studying the young man before him. Finally, Tae-jin spoke, his voice low and measured. "Park Ji-hoon, I'm going to tell you something that very few people know. Last Friday, when you thought I was asleep, I was testing you. Everything in that room, the money, the gun, the information, it was all deliberately placed there to see what kind of man you are." Ji-hoon's eyes widened, a flush of shame coloring his cheeks. "Sir, I would never—" Tae-jin raised a hand, cutting him off. "I know. That's why you're here. In my line of work, I have learned that there are 3 types of people in this world. The first are those who take what they want without hesitation or remorse. The second are those who want to take but are held back only by fear of getting caught. And the third," he paused, his gaze intensifying, "the third are those who choose to do the right thing even when no one is watching, even when they have nothing to gain, even when every circumstance in their life has given them reason to be selfish." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You are the third type, Ji-hoon, and in my world, that makes you rarer than diamonds, more valuable than gold." Ji-hoon sat frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Tae-jin turned back to face him. "I know your story. I know what you sacrificed for your mother, what you did to protect that girl, what you have endured. And I know that you are wasting your potential moving boxes in my warehouses." One of the men behind the desk stepped forward and placed a folder in front of Ji-hoon. Tae-jin continued, "Inside that folder is a contract. Starting today, you will work as my personal assistant. Your salary will be 20 million won per month. You will have access to education, training, and opportunities that will allow you to become the person you were meant to be before life interrupted your path." Ji-hoon's hands trembled as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the document in disbelief. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you do this for me?" Tae-jin returned to his desk and sat down, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Because 30 years ago, I was you. I was a young man with nothing, no family, no future, no hope. And someone gave me a chance when I deserved it least. That person told me that the measure of a man is not where he starts, but what he does with the opportunities he's given." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "That blanket you put over me, that note you left, that jacket you offered, those weren't the actions of an employee trying to impress his boss. Those were the actions of a good person, someone who hasn't let the cruelty of this world turn his heart cold. And I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who will do anything for money, for power, for status. But loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that comes from character rather than calculation, that I can't buy." Ji-hoon felt tears burning behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "What if I disappoint you, sir? What if I'm not as good as you think I am?" Tae-jin smiled, a rare expression that transformed his entire face. "Then you'll learn, you'll grow, you'll become better.
That's what opportunity is for. But I don't believe I'm wrong about you, Ji-hoon. My survival has depended on my ability to read people. And when I look at you, I see someone who will not only meet my expectations, but exceed them." He stood and extended his hand across the desk. "So, what do you say? Will you accept?" Ji-hoon rose on shaking legs, staring at the outstretched hand of the most powerful man in Seoul. Every instinct told him this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch, that people like him didn't get chances like this. But as he looked into Tae-jin's eyes, he saw something he had never expected to find in a man with such a fearsome reputation: genuine respect. Ji-hoon reached out and clasped Tae-jin's hand firmly. "Yes, sir, I accept, and I promise you I will prove that your faith in me is not misplaced." "I know you will," Tae-jin said quietly. Then, to the surprise of everyone in the room, he added, "And please, stop calling me sir all the time. My name is Tae-jin." Over the next 6 months, Ji-hoon's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Tae-jin kept his promise, enrolling Ji-hoon in business courses, teaching him about finance, strategy, and leadership. But more than that, he became a mentor, a guide, and something even more unexpected: a friend. Ji-hoon learned that beneath Tae-jin's cold exterior was a man who had been forced to make impossible choices, who carried the weight of protecting hundreds of families whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. He learned that the underworld wasn't as simple as good and evil, that sometimes the people society labeled as criminals were the only ones willing to protect those the system had failed. But Tae-jin also learned from Ji-hoon. The young man's optimism, his belief in second chances, his refusal to become cynical even after everything he had endured, began to soften some of the harder edges of Tae-jin's worldview. Where Tae-jin saw problems that required ruthless solutions, Ji-hoon often found alternatives that achieved the same result with less collateral damage. It was Ji-hoon who, one evening as they sat on the balcony of the penthouse watching the sunset over Seoul, that asked Tae-jin the question that had been weighing on his heart for months. "Why don't you have any family? Someone like you, with everything you've built, why—"
Tae-jin gestured to the chair across from him, and Ji-hoon sat, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes respectfully lowered. For a long moment, Tae-jin said nothing, simply studying the young man before him. Finally, Tae-jin spoke, his voice low and measured. "Park Ji-hoon, I'm going to tell you something that very few people know. Last Friday, when you thought I was asleep, I was testing you. Everything in that room, the money, the gun, the information, it was all deliberately placed there to see what kind of man you are." Ji-hoon's eyes widened, a flush of shame coloring his cheeks. "Sir, I would never—" Tae-jin raised a hand, cutting him off. "I know. That's why you're here. In my line of work, I have learned that there are 3 types of people in this world. The first are those who take what they want without hesitation or remorse. The second are those who want to take but are held back only by fear of getting caught. And the third—" he paused, his gaze intensifying. "The third are those who choose to do the right thing even when no one is watching, even when they have nothing to gain, even when every circumstance in their life has given them reason to be selfish." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You are the third type, Ji-hoon, and in my world that makes you rarer than diamonds, more valuable than gold." Ji-hoon sat frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Tae-jin turned back to face him. "I know your story. I know what you sacrificed for your mother, what you did to protect that girl, what you have endured. And I know that you are wasting your potential moving boxes in my warehouses." One of the men behind the desk stepped forward and placed a folder in front of Ji-hoon. Tae-jin continued, "Inside that folder is a contract. Starting today, you will work as my personal assistant.
Your salary will be 20 million won per month. You will have access to education, training, and opportunities that will allow you to become the person you were meant to be before life interrupted your path. Ji-hoon's hands trembled as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the document in disbelief. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you do this for me?" Tae-jin returned to his desk and sat down, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Because 30 years ago, I was you. I was a young man with nothing, no family, no future, no hope. And someone gave me a chance when I deserved it least. That person told me that the measure of a man is not where he starts, but what he does with the opportunities he's given." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "That blanket you put over me, that note you left, that jacket you offered, those weren't the actions of an employee trying to impress his boss. Those were the actions of a good person, someone who hasn't let the cruelty of this world turn his heart cold. And I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who will do anything for money, for power, for status. But loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that comes from character rather than calculation, that I can't buy." Ji-hoon felt tears burning behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "What if I disappoint you, sir? What if I'm not as good as you think I am?" Tae-jin smiled, a rare expression that transformed his entire face. "Then you'll learn, you'll grow, you'll become better. That's what opportunity is for. But I don't believe I'm wrong about you, Ji-hoon. My survival has depended on my ability to read people. And when I look at you, I see someone who will not only meet my expectations, but exceed them." He stood and extended his hand.
Tae-jin stared at him incredulously. "Choi Sung-min has been trying to kill me for a decade. There is no common ground." "Everyone wants something," Ji-hoon insisted. "Let me find out what he wants, what he really wants, and maybe we can offer him something that makes peace more valuable than war." Against his better judgment, Tae-jin agreed to let Ji-hoon try. What followed was 2 weeks of careful negotiation, research, and risk-taking that would have been reckless if it hadn't been so carefully calculated. Ji-hoon discovered that Choi's daughter had a rare genetic disorder and that Choi had been secretly funneling money into medical research, desperately searching for a cure. Ji-hoon brought this information to Tae-jin, along with a proposal. Through his legitimate business connections, Tae-jin had relationships with pharmaceutical companies and research hospitals. What if they helped Choi's daughter, not as an act of manipulation, but as a genuine gesture of humanity? Tae-jin was skeptical. And what if he sees this as weakness and attacks anyway? "Then we'll deal with that," Ji-hoon said simply. But what if he doesn't? What if showing him that we value life, even the life of his child, is exactly what breaks the cycle of violence? In the end, Tae-jin made the call. He arranged for Choi's daughter to be admitted to Seoul's best medical facility, with all expenses covered by an anonymous donor. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't make it conditional on peace, simply did it because it was the right thing to do. The assassination attempt never happened. Instead, Choi Sung-min requested a face-to-face meeting. No weapons, no guards, just 2 men talking. When they met in a private room at a neutral location, Choi bowed deeply, tears in his eyes. "I have spent 10 years hating you," Choi said, his voice thick with emotion. "And then you save my daughter's life with no conditions, no demands. Why?" Tae-jin glanced at Ji-hoon, who stood quietly in the corner, and then back at Choi. "Because I was reminded recently that the measure of a man is not how ruthlessly he destroys his enemies, but how wisely he turns them into allies. And because your daughter is innocent in our war. She deserves a chance at life, regardless of the conflicts between us." Choi wiped his eyes and extended his hand. "You have given me back my child. From this day forward, my family is in your debt. The war between us is over."
That night, as Tae-jin and Ji-hoon returned to the penthouse, Tae-jin put a hand on Ji-hoon's shoulder. "You were right. I have spent so many years believing that power comes from fear and strength, but you showed me something different. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose mercy. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is compassion." Ji-hoon smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. "I learned that from you, actually. The night you tested me, you could have set a trap and punished me if I failed, but instead you gave me a reward for succeeding. You showed me that you believe in encouraging good rather than just punishing bad. Everything I've done since then has been trying to live up to the example you set." Tae-jin felt something warm unfold in his chest, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 15 years. Looking at Ji-hoon, he realized that somewhere along the way, this young man had become more than an employee, more than a mentee. He had become the son Tae-jin thought he had lost forever. Tae-jin said carefully, choosing his words with rare uncertainty, "When I lost my family, I promised myself I would never allow anyone close enough to hurt me again. But you have broken through every wall I built, not with force, but with genuine kindness. You have become important to me in a way I did not expect and certainly did not plan for." Ji-hoon's eyes widened, understanding the weight of what Tae-jin was saying. For a man like Kim Tae-jin, admitting emotional attachment was the ultimate vulnerability. "I feel the same," Ji-hoon said quietly. "You saved my life, not just by giving me a job, but by giving me purpose, by believing I was worth saving. My own father abandoned me, but you chose me. That means everything." Tae-jin nodded slowly, and then did something he had never done with anyone in his organization. He pulled Ji-hoon into an embrace, brief but genuine, the gesture of a father claiming his son. When they pulled apart, Tae-jin's voice was rough with emotion. "I want to make this official. I want to legally adopt you as my son and heir. Everything I have built, all of it, I want to know it will be in the hands of someone who will use power wisely, who will protect the people who depend on us, who will choose mercy when possible and strength when necessary." Ji-hoon stood speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Tae-jin said with a small smile. "Say you'll help an old man who has finally remembered that money and power mean nothing if you have no one to share them with." "Yes," Ji-hoon whispered, his voice breaking. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The legal process took 3 months, and during that time, the news spread throughout Seoul's underworld. Kim Tae-jin, the dragon of Seoul, had chosen an heir, and it wasn't one of his longtime lieutenants or a relative from his extended family. It was a former convict with no connections, no background, nothing but character and loyalty. Some in the organization grumbled, questioning whether Ji-hoon was tough enough, whether he understood the harsh realities of their world. But Tae-jin silenced all dissent with a simple demonstration. He arranged for Ji-hoon to spend 1 day walking through every aspect of their operations, from the legitimate businesses to the shadowy dealings that kept the empire running. At the end of that day, Ji-hoon stood before the assembled leadership and spoke. "I know many of you doubt me. You see my age, my background, my idealism, and you wonder if I'm strong enough for this world. But strength isn't just about how much violence you can inflict or how much fear you can inspire. Strength is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, about building something that lasts beyond your own lifetime, about having the courage to change when change is needed." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "I will never ask you to be weak. I will never ask you to tolerate disrespect or let our enemies take advantage. But I will ask you to be smart,
to be strategic, to remember that every action we take has consequences that ripple out beyond what we can see. And I promise you this, I will honor the legacy that Tae-jin has built, but I will also help evolve it into something that can survive in a changing world. The room was silent, and one of the oldest lieutenants, a man who had served Tae-jin for 20 years, stood and bowed. I have watched you these past months, young Ji-hoon. I have seen how you carry yourself, how you treat people, how you think before you act. If this is the man our boss has chosen, then I will follow him. One by one, the others rose and bowed as well, and Ji-hoon felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a mantle. On the day the adoption became official, Tae-jin held a private ceremony at the penthouse. Mrs. Park was there, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son become part of a family she had never dared to dream he could join. Several of Tae-jin's most trusted associates attended as well, bearing witness to this unprecedented event. But the moment that stayed with everyone present occurred when the official documents were signed and sealed. Tae-jin stood and raised his glass. Today I do not just gain a son and heir, I reclaim something I thought was lost forever. Park Ji-hoon came into my life as a test, as a way for me to confirm what I already believed about the world, that people are fundamentally selfish and motivated by greed. He smiled at Ji-hoon, his eyes bright with emotion. But he proved me wrong in the best way possible. He showed me that goodness exists, that loyalty can be earned rather than bought, and sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you were born into. From this day forward, he is not just my son in name, but my son in every way that matters. Ji-hoon stood, his own glass raised, his voice clear and strong. I promise you, Father, that I will honor this gift you have given me. I will work every day to be worthy of your faith, to protect what you have built, and to help create a legacy that we can both be proud of. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself, and for teaching me that strength and compassion are not opposites, but partners.
They drank together, and in that moment, watching from the corner of the room, Mrs. Park understood that her prayers had been answered in ways she never could have imagined. Her son, who had been lost, was now found. Her son, who had been broken, was now whole. Her son, who had been judged and dismissed by the world, had been chosen by one of the most powerful men in Korea to carry on his legacy. 5 years passed, and the transformation was remarkable. Under Ji-hoon's influence, Tae-jin's organization evolved. They phased out their most violent operations, focusing instead on legitimate businesses and providing protection for communities that the police ignored. The job training program Ji-hoon had proposed grew into a full network of rehabilitation centers, helping hundreds of ex-convicts find honest work and rebuild their lives. But they never forgot the lesson that had started it all. Character matters more than background, and sometimes the greatest act of power is choosing mercy over vengeance. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony where they had shared so many conversations over the years, Ji-hoon said, "Do you ever regret it, testing me that night? What if I had failed?" Tae-jin considered the question carefully. "If you had failed, I would have fired you and forgotten about you. But I don't believe you would have failed, Ji-hoon. I have tested many people over the years in similar ways, and very few have passed. But something about you, even before that test, something in the way you moved, the way you treated your mother, told me you were different. Or maybe you just needed to believe that good people still existed," Ji-hoon suggested gently. Tae-jin smiled. Perhaps. Perhaps I was the one being tested that night. Perhaps the universe was asking me whether I could recognize goodness when I saw it, whether I had become so cynical that I would miss the opportunity of a lifetime, and I'm grateful I passed that test.
They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights sparkle below them. Two men from completely different worlds, brought together by chance, by circumstance, by a simple act of kindness that neither of them would ever forget. And somewhere in the darkness, other tests were being given, other chances were being offered, other lives were being transformed by the simple but profound choice to see the best in people rather than assume the worst. Kim Tae-jin had pretended to sleep that night 5 years ago to test a young man's character. But in doing so, he had awakened something in himself that had been dormant for far too long, the capacity for hope, for trust, for love. And Park Ji-hoon, now Kim Ji-hoon, had proven that sometimes the greatest power in the world is not wealth or influence or fear, but the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to do the right thing when no one is watching. The blanket Ji-hoon had placed over a sleeping mafia boss had covered more than just a body against the cold. It had covered years of loneliness, of isolation, of believing that kindness was weakness and trust was foolish, and in that single gesture, 2 lives had been changed forever. If you were in Ji-hoon's position, what would you have done? Would you have taken the money and run, seeking to escape your circumstances by any means necessary? Or would you have chosen integrity even when the cost seemed too high and the reward uncertain? Share your answer in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that character matters more than circumstances, and that one good choice can change everything, don't forget to like and subscribe. Here at K-Mafia Stories, we tell tales about the unexpected bonds that form in the most unlikely places, about the hidden codes of honor that exist in the shadows, and about the extraordinary things that happen when powerful people recognize true worth. Thank you for watching. Remember, the measure of a man is not what he does when the world is watching, but what he chooses when he believes no one will ever know. Character is revealed in the dark, but its light can shine bright enough to change destinies. Never underestimate the power of a single kind act. Never assume that where you start determines where you finish, and never forget that sometimes the most dangerous test is the one that reveals not your weakness, but your strength. 3 years after the adoption, on a cold November night, everything changed. Ji-hoon was now 28, confident and respected throughout Seoul's underground network. He had proven himself not just as Tae-jin's son, but as a leader in his own right, someone who could negotiate peace treaties between rival factions and resolve disputes that would have once ended in bloodshed. But peace always has a price to pay, and that night the bill came due. Ji-hoon was reviewing financial reports in his office when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Min-so, one of their most trusted intelligence operatives. The message contained only 3 words: Dragon's Nest compromised. Dragon's Nest was the code name for Tae-jin's penthouse. If it had been compromised, it meant someone had breached their innermost sanctuary, the one place in all of Seoul that was supposed to be untouchable. Ji-hoon's blood ran cold. Tae-jin was supposed to be home that evening, having canceled a meeting to rest after a particularly exhausting week. Without hesitation, Ji-hoon grabbed his jacket and ran for the elevator, dialing Tae-jin's number as he moved. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried the penthouse landline. No answer. He called the head of security. The line was dead. By the time Ji-hoon's car screeched to a halt outside the building 15 minutes later, he knew something was terribly wrong. The normal rotation of guards at the entrance was gone, replaced by an eerie emptiness. The lobby lights were dimmed, and the night attendance desk was abandoned, papers scattered across the floor as if someone had left in a hurry. Ji-hoon took the private elevator to the penthouse, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had a concealed pistol in his jacket, something Tae-jin had insisted he carry ever since the adoption, though Ji-hoon had never had to use it. His hand moved to the weapon now, finding cold comfort in its weight. The elevator doors opened to darkness. The penthouse's main lights were off, but Ji-hoon could see flickering shadows from the study, the erratic light of a struggle or worse. He moved silently through the space he knew so well, every instinct screaming danger. When he reached the study doorway, what he saw made his blood freeze. Tae-jin was on his knees in the center of the room, hands bound behind him, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. Standing behind him with a gun pressed to his head was a man Ji-hoon recognized immediately. Lee Sang-woo, one of their own senior lieutenants, someone who'd served Tae-jin for 15 years. Around the room stood 5 more men, all armed, all wearing the expression of people who had already crossed a line from which there was no return. And sitting calmly in Tae-jin's own chair behind the desk was a woman Ji-hoon had never seen before, elegant and cold, dressed in a white suit that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Ah, the prodigal son arrives. Right on time. Please come in, Ji-hoon. We've been waiting," the woman said, her voice smooth as silk and just as suffocating. Ji-hoon's hand moved to his weapon, but Sang-woo pressed the gun harder against Tae-jin's temple. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. One wrong move, and the great Kim Tae-jin dies right here on his expensive carpet." Ji-hoon slowly raised his hands, stepping into the room. His eyes met Tae-jin's, and what he saw there wasn't fear, but rather a deep sadness mixed with resignation, as if this was an ending Tae-jin had always known was coming. "Who are you?" Ji-hoon asked, keeping his voice steady, despite the terror coursing through his veins. The woman smiled, an expression that never reached her eyes. "My name is Yoon-mi Sun, and I represent certain interests that have grown very tired of your father's recent softening. You see, Ji-hoon, when Kim Tae-jin controlled the underworld with an iron fist, when he was ruthless and predictable, he was useful to us. But since you came into his life, since he started this ridiculous redemption arc, helping ex-convicts and making peace with rivals, he has become a liability." "So you betray him," Ji-hoon said, his voice hard. "After everything he's done, after 15 years of loyalty, you turn on him like this, Sang-woo?" Sang-woo's face twisted with bitterness. "Loyalty? I gave him 15 years of my life, Ji-hoon. I bled for him. I killed for him. I sacrificed everything. And then you show up, a nobody, a criminal with no background, no experience, no history, and within months he's his son and heir? Everything I worked for, everything I earned, handed to you because you put a blanket over him?" Ji-hoon felt the weight of those words, understanding for the first time the resentment that must have been building beneath the surface all along. "Sang-woo, if you had wanted—" "I didn't want charity. I wanted what I deserved. But Tae-jin was so blinded by your little performance of goodness that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. So when Miss Yoon approached me with an opportunity to finally claim what should have been mine, I took it." Yoon-mi Sun stood gracefully, walking around the desk with predatory calm. "The people I represent have decided it's time for new management in Seoul's underworld.
What happened next occurred so fast that Ji-hoon only understood it in retrospect. The sound of silenced gunshots, bodies hitting the floor, shouts of confusion, and then the emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in dim red. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Park, Ji-hoon's mother, holding a remote control device. Behind her were a dozen men Ji-hoon recognized as members of Tae-jin's personal guard, the real guard, not the compromised security that Sang-woo had replaced. And Tae-jin was no longer bound. He stood in the center of the room holding Sang-woo's own gun, which he had somehow taken during the blackout. The 5 armed men who had been surrounding them were all on the ground, disarmed and subdued. Only Yoon-mi Sun remained standing, though she was now surrounded with no path of escape. Ji-hoon stared in shock. Did you really think I survived 30 years in this business without learning to prepare for betrayal?" Tae-jin said, his voice carrying an edge of dark amusement. "I knew Sang-woo was compromised 3 weeks ago.
I knew about Yoon's organization, knew about their plan, knew everything. He looked at Sang-woo, who was now on his knees, the same position Tae-jin had been in moments before, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes. I gave you every opportunity to come to me, to tell me what they were offering you, to let me help you. But you chose this path, and now you'll face the consequences. Sang-woo's face was a mask of disbelief and rage. You knew? All of this was a trap? Not a trap, Tae-jin corrected. A test. I wanted to see how far you would go, whether there was any part of the man I once trusted still remaining. But you were willing to kill me, willing to kill my son. All for what? Power? Money? Pride? He turned to Yoon Mi-soon, who, despite being surrounded, maintained her composure with impressive discipline. You're good, Kim Tae-jin. Better than I was told. But you should know that killing me won't stop what's coming. I'm just one piece of a much larger organization, one that has decided your time is over. Whether you survive tonight or not, the war is already beginning. Then let it begin, Tae-jin said quietly. But know this, I am not the same man I was 5 years ago. I have something now that I didn't have then, something your organization can't account for in their calculations. And what is that? Yoon asked, genuinely curious. Tae-jin looked at Ji-hoon and his expression softened. I have someone worth fighting for, someone worth protecting, someone who reminds me every day why I should be better than the monster this world tried to make me, and that makes me more dangerous than I've ever been, because a man with nothing to lose is reckless, but a man with everything to lose is unstoppable. In the aftermath, as police sirens wailed in the distance, called by Mrs. Park before the confrontation even began, Ji-hoon sat with his mother in the penthouse kitchen while Tae-jin dealt with the aftermath. His hands were shaking from the adrenaline crash, and Mrs. Park held them gently, the way she had when he was a child. How long have you known? About the plan? About tonight? Your father told me 2 weeks ago. He asked me to be ready, to have the security team prepared, to help coordinate the response. He trusts me, Ji-hoon, perhaps almost as much as he trusts you. Ji-hoon looked at his mother with new understanding. All these years, I thought you were just the maid, but you've been part of his inner circle all along, haven't you? Mrs. Park smiled gently. Do you remember when I first asked Tae-jin to give you a chance? You thought I was begging for a favor. But the truth is, I knew exactly what he would do. I knew he would test you, because he tests everyone. And I knew you would pass, because I raised you to be a good person, even when the world gave you every reason not to be. You set this all up, Ji-hoon whispered. From the beginning, you knew. I hoped, Mrs. Park corrected. I hoped that 2 broken people could heal each other. Your father lost his family, and you needed a father. I couldn't give you the life you deserved, but I knew someone who could, if only he could remember to love again. Ji-hoon pulled his mother into an embrace, tears finally falling freely. Thank you for everything, for never giving up on me, for believing I could be more than what my circumstances suggested, for giving me a family. When Tae-jin entered the kitchen an hour later, exhausted and still bleeding slightly from the earlier injury, he found Ji-hoon and Mrs. Park sitting together at the table, talking quietly. He paused in the doorway, watching them, and felt something warm expand in his chest. Mrs. Park, he said formally, though his tone was gentle, I believe it's time we discussed adjusting your official title. Chief of Staff seems more appropriate than head housekeeper, don't you think? Mrs. Park stood and bowed, but her eyes were twinkling. Whatever title you prefer, Mr. Kim. Though I should warn you, I'll still insist on making sure you eat properly and get enough sleep. Tae-jin laughed, a sound that had become more common in recent years. I wouldn't have it any other way. He sat down at the table with them, and for a moment they were simply 3 people who had found family in the most unlikely circumstances. But the moment couldn't last long. There was still work to be done, threats to address, and a war to prepare for. "Tell me the truth," Ji-hoon said seriously. "How bad is it? This organization Yoon represents, what are we facing?" Tae-jin's expression grew grave. "They call themselves the Commission. It's a network of old money families, corrupt politicians, and international criminal enterprises who have controlled Korea's underworld from the shadows for generations. I've known about them for years, but I was careful never to challenge them directly, to keep my operations just small enough that they saw me as useful rather than threatening." "But you changed," Ji-hoon said, understanding dawning. "You started legitimizing the businesses, helping people, making peace instead of war. You became less useful and more dangerous to their model." "Exactly," Tae-jin confirmed. "And when they realized I wasn't going to return to the old ways, they decided to remove me and install someone they could control. Sang-woo was supposed to be that person." "So what do we do now?" Mrs. Park asked, her voice steady despite the weight of what they were discussing. Tae-jin looked at both of them and then made a decision that would change everything. "We fight, but not the way they expect, not with violence and intimidation, but with the one weapon they've never had to face before: truth." He pulled out his phone and opened an encrypted folder. "For the past 3 years, ever since I realized the Commission existed, I've been gathering evidence, bank records, communications, proof of their involvement in everything from human trafficking to political assassinations. I have enough information to bring down not just the criminal elements, but the legitimate faces they hide behind, the politicians and business leaders who use their power to exploit others." "That's incredibly dangerous," Ji-hoon said, his strategic mind immediately seeing the implications. "If you expose them, they'll come at you with everything they have." "They're already coming," Tae-jin replied. "Only the question is whether we defend ourselves in the shadows or bring everything into the light. And I'm tired of the shadows, Ji-hoon. I'm tired of playing by rules written by people who have no honor, no conscience, no humanity." He looked at his son with fierce determination. "You taught me that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. Well, this is me choosing to do the right thing. I'm going to burn their whole corrupt empire down, and I'm going to do it legally, publicly, through the courts and the media. I'm going to show them that the era of ruling by fear and hidden power is over." Ji-hoon felt fear and pride warring in his chest. What Tae-jin was proposing was tantamount to declaring war on the most powerful people in Korea, maybe in all of Asia. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was right. "Then I'm with you," Ji-hoon said firmly. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm with you." Mrs. Park reached across the table and took both their hands. "We all are. Family doesn't abandon each other when things get difficult. Family stands together." Tae-jin squeezed their hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Then tomorrow we begin. We reach out to journalists we can trust, prosecutors who haven't been bought, international law enforcement agencies that have been trying to crack the Commission for years. We give them everything, and we don't stop until every single one of those people is exposed for what they really are." "They'll retaliate," Ji-hoon warned. "They'll go after everyone we care about, everything we've built." "I know," Tae-jin said quietly. "That's why everyone important to us is being moved to secure locations tonight. The rehabilitation centers, the job training programs, all the people we've helped over the years, they're all being protected. And he paused, his voice dropping. "We're going into hiding until the evidence is public. Once it's out there, we'll be safer, because killing us won't bury the truth anymore." The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Safe houses were prepared, allies were contacted, evidence was copied and distributed to multiple sources. The penthouse was abandoned, too compromised